With me now is Brett Jollie, the MD of Aberdeen Asset Management. Brett, what are the issues that you think are facing the funds management sector today?
Look, I think the obvious one, being an investment manager, is investment markets. We are 7 years down the track from the global financial crisis, and we're still in the crisis, to be honest. You only have to look at Europe in the last couple of weeks. Greece is at the crux again. So we've got a great deal of liquidity sloshing around global financial markets, with quantitative easing programs having been implemented over various timeframes over the last 5 or 6 years. The US is looking to come out of, it is out of QE and is looking potentially to raise rates later this year. That's going to have some fairly significant impacts on global markets. We've got other parts of the world in various stages of recovery, if you can call it that. And it makes it very difficult to invest in this environment. What are long-term returns going to be like in an environment where interest rates are at record lows right now, which has essentially bidded up asset prices for most assets? It's a very difficult market to invest in. Whilst returns have been strong for investors, actually investing into these markets is going to be difficult. So that's going to be a real challenge for anyone investing, and anyone that has superannuation is indirectly part of that.
So the Greek issue is really infecting Europe broadly and the rest of the world even more broadly.
Well, it's only a small economy, but the direct impact of what Greece will have is limited. But it's the confidence of the outcome. If we look to if they were to default, if they were to potentially exit the euro, that's going to have major implications on global markets.
I want to talk about superannuation here in Australia, and the Financial System Inquiry stated that there's a lack of price-based competition in the industry and that active investment strategies are costly and don't add value. What are your thoughts on this?
Look, I'd refute that, absolutely. And as the Financial Services Council submission to the FSI put fairly plainly, we have a very competitive funds management industry here. We've got over 300 fund managers in the market. Certainly a large number of international investment managers are here, and that provides for a very competitive investment environment. And if you look at fees, clearly having that number of managers here in the first place is going to create a competitive fee environment. But also, if you look at superannuation, and this is what people don't focus in on too much, there's certainly a concern that there isn't enough competition in superannuation. Well, there are a great number of superannuation funds out there, and over time the superannuation trustees have had the ability to drive down investment fees. So we do have a very competitive fee environment in Australia. And clearly, I'm part of a global asset manager. I can look at the fees that we offer around the world, and I can tell you that the fees that we offer in Australia are lower than any other market that we're in for the same product.
Why do you think there's been so much emphasis on fees? Is it a cultural thing? Should we be instead asking the question, well, what value do I get? What return do I get? Instead of always asking about the fee.
Spot on. It's about value. Okay, there clearly is focus on fees, and I think that certainly there are areas where fees can come down. If you look at the wider superannuation, so I guess you've got to break down this investment management fees. That is one component of the superannuation fund structure. There's administration fees, there's trustee fees, and so forth. And I think there's areas of the superannuation fee structure which can be reduced, and the system's dealing with that. If you look at SuperStream, classic example, where a fairly inefficient processing environment which will be improved over time. If you look at the investment fees component, though, look, you need to look at value. If an investment manager is providing positive returns, net of fees, consistent with its risk budget and consistent with its investment objective, then I dare say most rational investors would be quite comfortable paying those fees, whatever they may be. So it's really up to the fund managers to ensure that they're delivering value. And not every manager does, and it's or over all parts of the cycle. But if you look across the industry, I think you would find that a great deal of managers are providing or are delivering positive returns.
Let's look at consumers here in Australia, and there's been a lot of talk about the fact that Australian consumers aren't that engaged in superannuation. I would probably refute that. I think a lot of people do understand it and understand it very well, particularly as it is a mandatory savings vehicle. Do you think, though, consumers have a clear understanding of a fund manager's role in terms of what they do and the part that they play in superannuation and in investment generally?
Generally, no. No, I think the onus is on us as an industry to raise the awareness of what fund managers do and the benefits that investment managers can provide. It comes down to awareness. If you look, it's about providing access to markets, asset classes, sectors that you may otherwise not have access to or be very difficult to get access to. It's about providing diversification strategies. It's about managing risk, through diversification, through pooling your investments, whether it's through a pooled investment structure like a unit trust, which you can now access either indirectly or through M funds on the stock exchange, or alternatively through investing in individual strategies that fund managers may provide. Fund managers ensure that there's accountability to companies. So most fund managers now are quite active in engaging with companies, and it's the onus is on fund managers as investors to ensure that companies, particularly the boards, are held accountable for their actions.
It's probably the next step, isn't it? I mean, Australians generally are very large equity holders because of our superannuation funds. You've got taxi drivers talking about this now. I guess when we get to that level of information and awareness, then I guess the role of fund managers is the next thing for people to be aware of.
Absolutely, and we are seeing that. Financial literacy has improved massively over the last decade. Superannuation's obviously behind that. Look at self-managed super funds. There's now 1 million Australians inside a self-managed super fund, $500 billion in assets under management. These are people investing for themselves in the main, self-directed. The next step for them is to start looking outside of their current investment strategy, which largely is direct equities on the Australian Stock Exchange, property and cash. So the benefits of diversification is something that these investors clearly need to embrace. And how do they access global markets, fixed income, and these asset classes that are traditionally quite hard to access directly? They need assistance with that, and fund managers can provide the capability and the vehicles to do that for them.
How do Australian investment managers perform from a return perspective when you line them up with your global peers?
Look, we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have a very competitive funds management industry here. It's world class. It's a very, very strong sector. And the investment returns that we can access or we can deliver in this market are as good as anywhere else in the world. Obviously, where you invest from doesn't really matter. It's what you're investing into, of course, that matters. So, it's a highly professional industry.
Why do you think we got to this level of expertise in Australia? Because we talked about this quite a lot when we went to Japan and Korea. Do you think it's because it's been driven by our compulsory superannuation system?
I would say that that's the primary driver, absolutely. We have a very large pool of capital that's been growing for many years now. We're 20 plus years down the track from the introduction of compulsory superannuation, and that has driven the growth of this industry. And obviously, that drives the participants within the industry, including investment managers. And in such a big market, you do need to be competitive. And as the industry's grown, obviously we've seen global players come into the market as well, and that provides additional expertise and competition.
Brett, Jollie, thank you.
Thank you.